Yeah.
So I'm curious, so for anyone who is listening, you were on Saturday Night Live in the 80s?
I was there season 6, which is considered the worst period of the show. But I'm going to tell you what, after coming back from the 50th, get together in New York, the Shindig.
Yeah, that was just this past week, right?
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day was the concert. I find that there's a certain mystique now to be in season 6,
Oh, there you go. There you go.
And the fact,
infamous.
That's what it is. It was so much idolatry of Lorne Michaels at this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's my party.
Yeah, but so last night we looked up. We were just doing some research on you. We saw the skit where you were playing Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Do you know if he ever saw that?
No, I don't. I really don't know. But
it was a very good impression.
I've never mentioned it to him. I had no idea that was me.
That's funny.
I know, but
that's what the costume's for. You can hide under that.
But I do know this.
So what was the connective tissue between that and landing the SNL gig?
Well, what happened there was, I was still in the Village, pursuing my songwriting career, and probably the wrong town at the wrong time. Nashville would have been the better choice. Mm-hmm. But I didn't do that. And so I met these agents who took a liking to me, and I had been working with a guy named Corey Hay, who was the inside reporter for the National Enquirer. Mm-hmm. And so I'd get so much money for every story I sold the National Enquirer. I was the secret source at Studio 54, right? And so I got to be friends with them. So I compiled all these stories and the outtakes and everything and started writing a book called Studio, A View from the Men's Room, because it was the only place that had a window. Mm-hmm. So if you went in there, you wanted to get some fresh air or whatever, you went in there and you looked out the window and looked on the back of Roseland. Otherwise, you were in the concrete womb of a secret government,
Yeah.
And so started writing that book, and it brought me one person that I interviewed with was a guy named Faris Bouhafa, and Faris Bouhafa became later the head of the Arab League, but he was the manager of some prominent singers down in the Quarter, down in the Village at that time.
Okay.
Singer-songwriters. He was a music guy. Mm-hmm. And he introduced me to the folks over at APA, Agency for the Performing Arts, and they handled variety, which meant that they handled the Blues Brothers, they handled Steve Martin, they handled all these Saturday Night Live people. Mm-hmm. And it was the year that they were replacing the original group. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, it's a chance in a million, but, to want to be a singer-songwriter, we think you're a funny guy. And you tell these stories and these impressions, why don't you go for it? They were going to set me up an audition and everything. Well, they lied. They didn't do that. They gave me a phone number to call Audrey Pert Dickman, who was the casting coordinator, the associate producer, been there forever since day one. Mm-hmm. And she's a British lady, very fine, Audrey Pert Dickman. So I called her, and they said, don't take no for an answer. That's what I did. And they told me it was already cast. I said, no, it's not. I said, you need to see me. So I started doing Rhett Butler and just, anything I could think of, Jimmy Carter. I was doing all these impressions on the telephone. I just switched from voice to voice to voice as I was talking to her. And finally she said, can you be here at 4:30 this afternoon? And I went down and took my guitar and opened with the Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash duet, where I was like Johnny Cash and C, there's Bob Dylan in A. And I modulate in those keys and voices, and also in the persona, as I was entertaining, and that sealed the deal, I think.
I know that era was short-lived for you, but what was that like? What was the day-to-day of working on that machine like for you? I
tell you what, it was like I think the first show that we did, which I wasn't involved in other than I co-wrote the cold opening, mm-hmm. which was that Live from New York Saturday night. I wrote that whole sketch with a friend that I'd helped to get a job there, but he had come to work there. He's a great writer, and eventually became head writer at the show. But we wrote that cold opening together, and that's something they've been gunning to do since the middle of the summer. And Bingo. I mean, it was I thought a great show. It got panned by the critics, but they were lying for it to pan it anyway. You know, it's a woman producer. Who does she think she is, taking over after Lorne Michaels, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. She has no experience in comedy. She's a music producer. You know, and I think that they kind of had pre-written a negative.
Yeah, and also after the old guard had already left, I'm sure that there was
absolutely
a gnashing of teeth. To
absolutely, and the sketch that I wrote went after cut them to the knees. I went right after them, and I love them all. You know, I got to be very good friends. But I said that's exactly what they would do if she was on the other foot. So let's go for it. And they were like, they couldn't believe that they were making fun of drug use. You know. But it wasn't limited to Saturday Night Live. Well, in our sketch, everybody was using drugs on the Today Show, the news, Gene Shalit, you know, Tom Snyder. How do you think he stays up so late? You know, and it was funny, and it was a takeoff because at that time, you know, they talk about who's hosted the show most. You know, I guess it's Steve Martin, I guess, but at that time it was Elliot Gould.
Really?
Yeah. And so Elliot Gould was doing the show. So we did the sketch like Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice. I don't know if you know this movie, but it was a hit movie at the time. It was about these couples who swap. Mm-hmm. And it was Elliot Gould, and what was the guy's name? He was an actor. He did I Spy with Bill Cosby, you know, for years on TV. And then there was Natalie Wood. And, gosh, I can't think of her name, but she was a bombshell, too. Blonde Carol and Noel. But anyway, they're in bed with the entire new cast. And everybody's naked in the bed together and on drugs. And obviously just had an orgy. And he's laying there in bed with them, you know, and they're like, oh, hi, Mr. Gould, remember me from last night? I'm kind of a cross between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray. Because that's what they were going to say in the press, you know. So I'm kind of a cross between Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, or I'm kind of a cross between Gilda and Lorraine. Remember me? And so they'd ask questions. What was it like on Saturday Night Live with the original cast? I love them. Did they really use drugs? And he was like, oh yeah, you know. But not just them. But I mean, the cameramen, the pages, the interns, everybody used drugs. In fact, the delivery guys would come up and deliver a sandwich, you know, and John Belushi would tackle them, hold them down, you know, while Dan Aykroyd just shoved coke up their nose. They'd get so stoned they couldn't even deliver their sandwiches. And, you know, so it was like way over the top.
Sounds like a wild time.
Yeah. And you know, it was like, Tom Snyder, don't tell me he uses drugs. How the hell do you think he stays up so late, you know? So it was a play on. It was a big over-the-top joke. Nobody should have been offended by it.
Yeah, and it's also you know what you're watching. You're watching SNL. Like,
exactly.
What are you expecting?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was funny, and I thought many of the other sketches that were deemed politically incorrect at the time were unfunny. I mean, were funny. And I think that they became unfunny once they allowed the curse of, you know, political correctness to seep in, because it's just really an academic form of censorship.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's as prevalent now as always, you know.
Yeah,
and it's like, you know, who's to say what's politically correct and what's not?
Well, with humor too, with humor too. I mean, humor is. It either if it makes you laugh, it's done its job.
I agree.
True.
I agree.
So after that, after the SNL era ends for you, how did you pivot? How did you pivot out of that, and did you go straight back to focusing on music? How did that moment of your life go?
Well, what happened next was I had a couple of other opportunities, and it was music. It was not in the way that I, you know, as a songwriter I'd hoped, but I did a lot of impressions, you know, so I ended up doing rock and roll the first 5,000 years.
Oh, so that was right after that. Gotcha.
Yeah, not long after that, yeah. And just other things, you know, other things came along. I ended up doing comedy, too, writing for National Lampoon magazine, you know, as one of the regular contributing editors.
Nice.
And I ended up getting a featured role on a short-lived show that was actually produced by Lorne Michaels called The New Show.
Oh, there you go.
With Buck Henry and Dave Thomas. But I don't think they didn't really take it as seriously. They didn't get into it as much as they should have, you know, and took it for granted. I think a lot of people were partying and stuff. And it just it didn't last long. It was like 5 weeks and a best of, you know.
Did you like that clip? Well, if you did, you should go check out the full podcast. I hate my day job and I'm trying to quit, so go subscribe because that'll help me do that. Thanks.